Hey everybody, good morning. Happy August 2nd. Today is Sunday and it is a beautiful day here in Minnesota. I got something a little bit special for you, a little bit different for you guys today. I'm going to be doing my testimony a little bit of sharing of my story. I know a lot of you guys are new to the channel and some of you guys haven't heard my story. I've shared it in videos in the past, but they're pretty far back. I got a lot of videos, so I figured I'd update you guys and let you guys know a little bit where I've come from. I have some time this morning. It's a beautiful day here in mid Minnesota, and I got my door open, and I'm really enjoying the vibe that late summer is sending me today. And I was born here in Minnesota. I was a child of a pretty crazy relationship between my real father, Brian, and my mom, Lori. My mom, Lori, was the babysitter for my older sister, Heidi, who is about 3 or 4 years older than me. And then my mom was the babysitter for Heidi, and then my dad ended up sleeping with the babysitter, who was my mom, and my mom had me when she was 16. So I was born, kind of illegitimately to my mom, who was only 16 at the time, and my dad, Brian, who was in his early 20s. So not a good relationship, not a good situation. Now, remember, this is the early 80s. Times were different. Not saying it was right. I definitely think it was wrong, but I think times back then were a little bit different. I remember seeing pictures of my mom pregnant with me, holding up a beer with my dad, Brian. He looked a lot like the guy from that 70s show, the guy that actually got in trouble for doing bad things. He had like a mustache and like big glasses and a little bit of a curly hair. But anyways, I remember seeing pictures of them partying, and so it was a little bit of a different time, right? My mom had me when she was 16, and I'm assuming that my grandpa Harry told my dad, "Hey, you need to, stay away from my daughter or whatever." And so I think that was the initial thing that kept my real dad from even pursuing a relationship with me, because I've only met my real dad a couple times. So I grew up in a trailer park in Monticello, where I was born, about 25 miles to the west here. And I grew up in that trailer park with my cousin and my godparents, my godmother, Roxanne, Tink, Shaughness, Elseth, and my godfather, Eldon Elseth, and we all kind of lived in the corner of the trailer park, Jelbergs in Monticello, and so that's where I grew up till I was about 5 or 6, and then my mom started moving me around, and we ended up in St. Michael, and where I went into my early elementary years, and then I was in Monticello, was in Buffalo, St. Michael, Big Lake, and then eventually my mom we moved to Kentucky. We lived in Iowa for a while. My mom used to date over the road truck drivers. My mom would catch a ride with these guys, and we would go all over. My mom was partying, and I would stay up on my godparents' farm in Warren, Minnesota, when my mom was out doing her partying. I would stay on the farm in the summer. I'd go to Bible camp, and some of my earliest memories are hanging out on the farm with my godfather, Eldon, who has now subsequently passed in the last couple of years, and there's a story behind that as well. But I was moved around a lot as a child. My mom had a lot of different kind of boyfriends. Some of these, most of them were alcoholic addicts. I saw a lot of drugs, saw a lot of alcohol. It was just a normal occurrence. Cigarettes, ashtrays. I mean, pot. You name it. I mean, it was around. And there's a couple times in my early years where I remember my mom leaving me home alone for quite a while. I was probably like 9 or 10, or no, I was probably about 8 or 9 or 10. And I remember having to go across the street the one time and saying to the people, "Hey, my mom left me." And they're like, "Well, you can stay over here." And nobody called the cops, nobody got the authorities involved. And so one time I remember crying on the stoop when my mom was leaving because I didn't want her to leave. And she's like, I'll be back, I'll be back. And then she came back like a couple days later. And I remember around that same time the movie Candyman came out. So I was really scared to look in the mirrors at the house because that movie had played on HBO in the basement. That Steve had a TV in the basement, and that played on there. And I got really scared when I saw that because I was home alone. And those were some formative years for me. Those years were a scary time for me, very unstable, a lot of abuse, neglect, and of course I was in school, but my mom moved me around. I think I mapped it out one time recently, and I think I went to like 11 or 12 different schools growing up until I went to high school in Elk River, right? So I lived on the farm a lot in these times, and I would go to Bible camp. These were places the farm and the Bible camp and going to these different places. I was in foster care too as I got older, and these places were actually a refuge for me. They were a place where I could go to be with people who were genuine and weren't on drugs or alcohol. And, you could imagine my mom probably sent me into foster care in all these different places because I was acting out because I was being abused. I was being neglected. A lot of my mom's boyfriends were abusive, physically abusive, thankfully not sexually abusive. And so a lot of them would just rough me up or be mean or, hit me. My mom had all kinds of different paddles and switches and things. And I remember at one time they used a paddle with holes in it. They were getting kind of diabolical and calculated with the punishment that I was receiving. And I know a lot of other people talk about that too as they grow up. And usually you hear about that in the 70s, 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right? Like the parents going a little bit overboard with the punishment, but it was still happening in the 90s when I was getting it. And obviously times have changed now. And if you hit your kid with a paddle or a board or a broomstick now, I mean, you're going to jail, right? Well, it was a little bit different in the 90s and 80s when I was growing up. And so, going to a lot of different schools, had a lot of behavioral problems. I was born actually with a cleft palate. I don't know if you guys can see it, but I was born with a cleft palate, a little bit of a lip pediment. I have a fake roof of my mouth. I have ear, nose, and throat problems. And so I had surgeries all the time. I was going through surgeries. I was going through hearing tests. And so I had a disability. I had a hearing impairment and speech impediment. So I was kind of in a little bit of the special ed group, right? And then my behavioral problems started, and they didn't really know what to do with me. So in the late 90s, me and my mom were living up in Warren, Minnesota. And we were pretty much on the farm, and my mom had gotten pregnant by one of the over-the-road truck drivers that she was with, and ended up having my sister Emma. Now, when my sister Emma was born, my mom cleaned up. I was about 13 when this happened. My mom cleaned up. She sobered up. She got off the drugs and the alcohol, and she met my stepdad, Greg. So Greg lived in Elk River, Minnesota. He was down in the cities. He's a nuclear engineer at NSP at the time, Northern States Power, but now which is XL in Monticello. And so we met him at family Bible camp at Blue Water, where I would go to Bible camp in the summer. We went to a family camp one time. I think my mom chose that to go meet somebody to try to meet somebody good, a Christian or whatever. And so my mom met my stepdad, and they moved me down. They met, and I remember the day that Greg came up to get me to bring me down to Elk River, Princess Diana died. So that's a memory that sticks in my mind, that when Greg came up to our house, to the farm up in Warren, we were actually watching the TV of the news coverage of Princess Diana dying. And in that time, they didn't sit me down and say, "Hey, things are going to be a little different now. You're gonna go to a new school in the cities, and you got to be prepared. And we have all these things in place for you to succeed." It wasn't like that. My mom and my stepdad basically just picked me up and moved me to the cities, and I lived it with Greg in his apartment with my two brothers, Alex and Blake, and my aunt and my uncle, Ann and Eric. We lived in a two-bedroom apartment with like six people, and my mom didn't come down from Warren for a few months, like 6 months maybe. And so I started school. Culture shock for me, of course. I was not used to the cities. I was not used to the people in the cities. I was around farm kids. I was around sports. I played flag football. I played basketball. I wrestled. But coming down to the cities, this stuff was A, more expensive, and B, a lot more competitive, right? These schools are really competitive, especially Elk River. So I didn't get to play much sports when I came down, and of course, I'm 14. I'm just going through puberty. I'm probably a little unruly. I'm pissed. Life has changed dramatically for me. No more summers on the farm, no more that sort of life. And so moving down to the cities was a complete culture shock for me. I was very angry, and I was stuck in a little apartment. I remember meeting some kids right away, Ron Carlson, and meeting a few other people in school that were probably just as unruly as I was. And we started hanging out. I started drinking alcohol. I started smoking marijuana. I started doing things that I normally wouldn't do, obviously, up on the farm. My attitude started to change towards my parents, and Greg was getting kind of, they didn't know how to control me, right? So I was very unruly, and not to the point where I was breaking stuff and like, but I had behavioral issues, and I was a very angry child and an angry teen. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't have a dad. Now all of a sudden I have a dad, and he's not very cool. He would sit on me. He would, I ended up Elk River. I ended up calling the police on him one time. He got arrested for abusing me, physically abusing me. He would sit on me, and they would pin me to the ground so I couldn't move. And I don't was it called respite care or something like that? Like where you only go on the weekends. So I did that a lot. And that was kind of leading up to Greg taking me down to the cities. And so when Greg took me to the cities, I really had a culture shock, you guys. My life really changed. I started doing some things that I normally wouldn't do. I was being mean. I was just getting into fights. And I had all these friends that were not good kids. And so where the story starts to change for me is I was hanging out with my friend Ron a lot, and we would go over to his house in Elk River off Highway 10, across from the Kelly farm. And his uncle Milton lived upstairs in this like kind of A-frame house. And I say these names because he's dead now, so yeah, it's a part of my story, and I say the names because I can. And so Milton would be upstairs, and I'm 13, 14 years old. 14, I'm vulnerable, and Ron's uncle ended up not molesting me, but was sexually abusing me in a way that I wasn't aware wasn't okay. I mean, now as an adult, I look back and I think, yeah, that's totally not okay, right? But when you're in that adolescent mindset and you're thinking like a child and you're thinking like that, I didn't know it was wrong. I just thought this is what people do, right? And so that's kind of like almost a turning point in my life. It's really difficult to share sometimes too, because I feel like that's where sexuality for me in my life became really confusing. Obviously, I'm heterosexual, right? But in that time, I was really confused because I have a man touching me and doing things with me that obviously I had never had before, even by a girl. And so I learned a little bit about, how to hide my feelings. And I think I might have mentioned it at one point to people or my parents, but I don't know if I was believed, and I don't know if I actually said anything. I can't really remember. But that went on a few times, and it really made me angry. I started to compartmentalize. I started to really feel like nobody was listening or hearing me. And then we moved from Elk River. My parents built a house. My dad had a really good job. My stepdad, Greg, he was an engineer for Excel. And they built a house in Rogers, which is about 10 minutes, 8 miles north or south of Elk River. And so finally, I've always wanted to live in a nice house, right? Like as a kid, I always dreamed of living in a nice house, and my mom and my stepdad built this really nice house, and my mom became really materialistic and real churchy and real like, this is who I am, I'm this perfect person, and all this sort of stuff. So we were going to church every Sunday, and they'd make us go to church. And as a child, that's like miserable. You'd rather be outside playing or biking around or hanging with your friends. And so my parents, this house had 4 floors. They had a top floor, a main floor, a basement, and then a second sub basement. And of course, I didn't get a room in the nice area of the house. They put me in the sub basement, which was dark, dingy. I think there was some windows obviously down there, but they were, like little windows or whatever. And so they put me down there, and it was unfinished, and that was kind of like the storage area. So I kind of felt like I was just stored down there, like, because I'm unruly. I'm not listening. I'm doing bad things. I got enrolled in Rogers Middle School, and I actually got expelled a couple months into it because I ended up punching somebody and knocking them out. So they expelled me from school. I got expelled. I started really acting up at home. I don't think my stepdad Greg and my mom knew what to do with me. And so Super Bowl Sunday, January 31st, on 1998, I got into a fight with my stepdad. He kicked me out of the house. I was in nothing but my boxers. He kicked me outside. It's like, below zero or whatever. And me and him are fighting. He's spraying me with water with the hose from the sink. It's just, he'd sit on me. He'd do all kinds of just things. He's a really big guy. Like I think he's like 6'3", 6'2", maybe like 6'1", 6'2", and 200 pounds. He's a big guy, right? And he would sit on me, and they would antagonize me, and they would spray me with water, that sort of thing. So he kicked me out of the house. They called the cops because I ended up breaking a couple planters out on the porch, and they called the cops, and they put me in the paddy wagon actually and brought me all the way down to the detention center in Minneapolis in Hennepin County, because that was in Hennepin County. And so Amy Klobuchar, who some of you guys might know as a U.S. state senator, was actually the Hennepin County DA at the time, and she sat across from me and my parents, and my parents were like, "We don't know what to do with this kid. He's acting out." So they put me in the Wilson Center, which was down in Faribault, for a year. I got sentenced to a year in this Faribault behavioral center, and so that's when I really started to realize like I didn't really have a normal life, right? I didn't have a normal set of parents. I didn't have a normal upbringing. I felt really, I got really spiteful, and I got really angry. And at this time, I'm 15. I should be getting my permit, learning how to drive, buying a car, that sort of stuff. And none of that stuff was happening because I was locked up. So I got locked up for a year down there. I went through school down there, and I was acting out down there too. And my parents would come down and see me once a month. And so, I got out of there, and I immediately, I think I went back home for a little while, and then I think they kicked me out. And then I think I was kind of homeless for a little while during prom. I remember living at Tiffany and Jorge's house in St. Michael. They took me in. They were people from my church. They're like, "How can this kid who's still in high school be homeless, right? Like, what is going on?" So they took me in, and I ended up going to prom with Krista and my best friend at the time, Alan Kohler, and I forget Alan's girlfriend's name, but we went to prom, and I ended up graduating while I was on work release. And while I was on work release, I ended up getting an apartment down in Shoreview, Minnesota, and I was 17 years old, going into 18 years old, my last senior year of high school, and I had my own apartment down in Shoreview. I was working, I was getting all the credits I needed to graduate from working, and so I graduated, and that's kind of where I'm going to leave it for today a little bit. I don't want to go too long because I don't want to bore you guys, but I spent a lot of my formative years in an abusive household with people who I don't think genuinely cared for me or about me, except for my godparents, and even my godmother. Later in my life now has disowned me. She doesn't talk to me. I feel like the only person in my life growing up that really cared was my godfather, Eldon. He was a farmer. He was a lawyer. He was a local politician. He was all the things that I looked up to, and I just thought he was so smart. And as a young child, I used to bug him a ton to go fishing, and he used to take these trips to Canada, and I used to just beg him to let me go with him to go. And I know I probably would never be able to go with him because that you wouldn't want to drag a kid on a fishing trip like that. That was kind of his time to go and hang out with his friends, and who knows. But Eldon ended up dying a couple years ago of cancer, and nobody told me. My godmother doesn't message me back. She doesn't return my phone calls, and so I kind of given up on that. And one of my sisters let it slip this last year that Eldon had died, and I was like, "What? What? Eldon died?" Like, and then I found out that he died, and I guess that hit me kind of hard in the last couple of years because I hadn't talked to him for a while, and I ended up going to jail later in my life. And he was one of the people that would take my call while I was in jail and put money on my books. And yeah, I was kind of manipulating him to do that, but it was also a place of comfort for me because I know that they cared. Like genuinely, I know that my godfather really cared about me, and I know that he had good intent in his heart, and he was a pure person. He always meant well, and never would lie or steal or cheat. He was just a really good person in my life, and I model a lot of my characteristics and a lot of the way I am today after what I've learned with him, my work ethic for one, how to be and how to be a man and how to conduct yourself. I learned a lot from him by working on the farm and living at his house on in the summers and stuff like that. I started to smoke a lot of weed. I started to do cocaine. I started drinking right after high school. I started drinking regularly, pretty much every night, every day. It was just something to do. I had my own apartment, so everybody would come and party at my place, and we would smoke weed. And I used to get my weed from this guy named Randy Stefanik. I think a lot of people probably know that name. He had like a chameleon colored Corvette. It would change colors, and he always had the best weed, and he would hook me up with weed, and it was funny. A lot of the people that I was friends with in high school kind of disowned me because I was the wild child. Like I was the person really going out and doing the bad things like cocaine and drinking and all that. And so, I didn't really keep a lot of people in my life at that time. I was kind of just running around and, my early 20s were chaos for me. I got into taking morphine, prescription painkillers, cocaine, crack, alcohol, no meth or heroin at this time, but I was really flirting and skirting the rules with some of that stuff. So, you know what? I'm gonna take a pause. I'm gonna come back, finish this up, and we'll wrap this up. All right, guys. Well, this is we're gonna be getting into the second part of my message here, my testimony, and after high school, I was started hanging out with some pretty unsavory people, and I started doing some hardcore drugs, cocaine, a little bit of painkillers, some crack, and a lot of alcohol. I was bouncing around from place to place. I was living out of my van at one point, and I was living with different people. And I ended up in St. Cloud, where one of my high school friends, best friend Alan Kohler, took me in, and I started working with him doing sheetrock. And we lived in an apartment in St. Cloud. Our girlfriends were best friends in high school. My girlfriend Krista was Alan's girlfriend's best friend, and so we went to prom together. And I kind of forgot to mention this in the prior part, but this is a really pivotal and important part of my message. And part of the message is that I went up and stayed with Alan, and Alan decided to join the Marine Corps. And so we went and saw the recruiter together in St. Cloud, and the recruiter was going to get us in on the buddy system. Now, if you remember in the first half of my message, I told you guys about my ear, nose, and throat problems and how I had basically a disability. Well, we went into the recruiter's office, and the recruiter's office thought that they could get me in on a waiver, and I could join the Marine Corps on the buddy system with Alan. We were all excited about getting in. I was unsure. I didn't know if I was going to get in or not, but Alan pretty much had the green light to get in, and he started training, running, doing all this stuff to get ready for boot camp. And well, we went up to MEPS, the military entering processing station, I think it was in Fargo, and we went up there, and we went up with a recruiter. We drove up, and I remember the day like it was yesterday. We drove up with the recruiter. We were all excited, and I got through some of the testing. I think I passed the hearing test, but then the doctor was doing his evaluation, and he saw that I had some ear, nose, and throat problems, and he told me what was going on, and they denied me. I got the stamp of disapproval that day, so I got to watch Alan swear in as a Marine, as a recruit, and the whole ride back from the recruiter, I was pretty bummed out. We had to ride back to St. Cloud to our apartment, and that was kind of the beginning of the end for me when it came to feeling like I had any hope in my life. I didn't get in the Marine Corps. They denied me, and I wasn't able to get in on a waiver or nothing like that. And so Alan ended up leaving for boot camp and left me in this apartment by myself. I ended up getting rid of the apartment and then sleeping on some couches of people in that building. I started taking some psychedelics. I started doing methamphetamine. I started hanging out with some people that just really weren't the best for me. And this is when I started to get plugged into the underground. And I really started to notice that there was a whole different life and a whole different group of people out here, other than the people that I went to high school with. And Alan obviously was a good dude. Never did anything. We would drink a little bit, but he was a really hardworking dude and really smart. He was a wrestler in high school. I was really good friends with his little brother Phil, and of course Phil and all the rest of the people. We all worked together in high school, played against sports, and I would stay at Alan and Phil's house. His mom would let me stay there, and I was friends with his sister, and they would let me stay there. When I was homeless, basically, because my mom and dad had kicked me out in high high school and I was homeless, going around from place to place. I would stay at Krista's house. I would stay there. I kind of bounced around. Well, when Alan got into the military, I kind of went downhill from there. I really wanted to get in the military. I really wanted to be a Marine. I thought this was right after 9/11, right? So I thought that we were going to go save the world and do this, and I ended up trying to get into the National Guard later in my life too, and I was really persistent. Actually, one of the things that I forgot to mention in the prior part was that my dad's uncle Leroy was a state senator. He was in the state senate. His name is Leroy Stumpf. He was in the district way up north, and I actually got a hold of him later in my life, and I actually had him write a letter of recommendation to the National Guard recruiters to let me in, but it still didn't work. And so when I got denied to get in the military, I was pretty bummed out. Started doing a lot of stuff I shouldn't have been doing. I was really sleeping around with a lot of different people. I was doing all kinds of drugs. I was experimenting, is what it was. And I had some stable people in my life, but not many. My mom didn't know where I was living because I kind of basically just said F you to her and everybody else. I didn't want any part in any of that. And my mom and dad, stepdad adopted 3 kids from Russia, Alosha, Ina, and Nina, and so they were at home and in my life, and it was a rough time in my life. I really wanted to get in the military, and I went downhill fast. I started working at this temporary. I used to work through a temp agency, and I worked at this plastics factory, and this plastic factory in Clearwater, and I started staying with these. I started staying with this guy, and he's gonna remain nameless because I don't know if he's still around or not, but I started staying with this guy who was renting this house out on this farm. And this farm, basically like a little farmstead on this little house. And this guy was like a neo-Nazi. He was a skinhead, right? And so he had swastikas tattooed all over, and he was really mean looking. And we started doing meth, and we started doing acid, and I was doing acid and meth with these guys, and I was living in the basement. And he had a buddy named Evil who was missing an eye, and he came over and he told me how he got his eye knocked out with a crowbar, and we were doing drugs, and I was doing acid, and I was hanging out with all these really really dangerous and really crazy people. I mean, I'm coming from Elk River. I'm pretty preppy. Trying to get in the military. Like my life started to go downhill really 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 fast. And the one thing that I will say about my mom is that in that time I was kind of not speaking to anybody. I was lost. I was doing drugs. I was really just not in a good place. Well, one day on one Saturday morning, I'm laying in bed with this random chick, and I heard a knock on the door. So I got up, and it was my mom. My mom had found out where I lived because the place that we were actually renting from the dad of one of my mom's friends from church. So somehow, some way, my mom found me. She came out. She's like, "You got to change your life. This is bad. Like you look really bad. This is not good, right?" And so it was shortly after that I moved out and I got an apartment in St. Cloud. And me and my friend Cameron, who was also a forklift operator at that plastics plant, we ended up getting an apartment. And then shortly after that, I met Stacy, who was about 20